what's happening in Gaza is a Holocaust. And what is currently being designed by the Israeli government is the final solution to their Palestinian problem. And as a Holocaust survivor, my reaction is not in my name. Extermination, dehumanization, starvation, blockade, lack of water and medication, the destruction of the health service, the hunting down of doctors, the hunting down of journalists, safe places which turn out to be not safe at all, but traps, concentration camps, all this together makes a clear Holocaust. Clearly, all these elements are not in any way different from similar actions by the Nazis during the Second World War. Gaza is an open-air concentration camp. In a sense, it's an extermination camp because there is no way out other than dying through bombing or disease or lack of food. Only alternative is to agree to be replaced somewhere where you don't want to be. I had not only the experience of the Holocaust and the hiding and the discrimination, etc., but the fighting went through our particular area where we were hiding. When we came out, when it was all over, I saw total devastation. Just like when you see the pictures of Gaza, destroyed buildings, piles of rubble, dead horses, dead people. I see exactly the same in Gaza. However, the great difference is that what I witnessed was a byproduct of two armies fighting. And what I see in Gaza is a deliberate destruction. And I think it's a degree evil, greater evil than what I've seen. The license which has been employed against the Palestinians, it's all based on the Holocaust experience. But rather than making the conclusion that this is something that we have to learn from and make it impossible to be repeated to any other people, they are actually using it as a license to complete lack of accountability towards any other people. But they continually making this connection and using this cover to acquire impunity, total impunity. And that is deliberate policy of the Zionists and the Israeli state. They create an increase of anti-Semitism the world over because they conflate Judaism with Zionism and their current policies. And as we know, a very large number of Jews who have a sense of justice are against it all. And yet they pretend to be speaking and acting on behalf of all Jews. It's amazingly damaging to Jewish people the world over. So not only has it become obvious that the Israeli state and Zionism are producing a genocide in Gaza, but it is actually the very worst thing that could have happened to the Jewish people who are associated with these dreadful acts. Any comparison between what's happening in Gaza and the genocide there and the Holocaust, World War II, and any denial or prohibition of a comparison is a taboo which must be broken, because it's quite clear and it's declared by the leadership of the Israeli government that the aim is ethnic cleansing and extermination. A recent Hebrew University poll has shown that 82% of the Jewish Israeli population agrees that there are no innocents in Gaza. And what is needed is a complete dismantling of the Zionist state and the Zionist movement. And we have to resist the tendency towards the travel in the direction of fascism at every stage, fascism, which happens in stages, incrementally. We can see this tendency, this direction of travel already clearly in, say, Germany and the United States, particularly on university campuses.
2 weeks ago, in honor of the 50th anniversary of her death, I gave a lecture on Hannah Arendt, her concept of totalitarianism, and how a lot of it applies to Israel, how many of the elements of totalitarianism that she describes can be found in Israel and its conduct, and how that can help us understand Israel. Now, the English lecture here on this channel got surprisingly few clicks. But over on my German channel, where I gave the same lecture in German, this got a lot of traction, and it got clicked way more than my usual videos, and I also received more comments, both here on YouTube itself and also via email. And there was a lot of positive feedback overall, but there was also negative feedback, which, of course, considering the topic and considering I was speaking in German and to Germans, I did anticipate. It did not surprise me. But it is still something I want to address. I tried at the start of the German video, I tried to speak to people's conscience, but it simply turns out that there are some people in Germany, and it's not a small group, who simply don't have a conscience. You can't put it any other way. That's how it is. This nation of mine, I consider to be today the most guilty nation on earth. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily the nation most responsible or the nation doing the most terrible things. Of course, when it comes to the genocide in Palestine, clearly Israel itself is the nation directly doing the most terrible things. And even after that, the second place would maybe be the USA, which is supporting Israel even more strongly than Germany is. But if you have been following my lectures in the last weeks and months on Kant's moral philosophy, or if you know anything about moral philosophy at all, then you should know that morality is not about our actions. It is about our will. How exactly the will, which is a super sensual thing, right? Something that cannot be seen or touched or whatever. How exactly the will appear in this world, how exactly it will manifest and realize itself, that's not simply up to me. That is up to circumstances of the sensual world. But the will itself, that is up to me. That is up to my freedom. And it is the will, and the will alone, by which someone's morality must be judged. Not whether that will produced more extreme or less extreme bad actions. Because again, that's not really in my hand. That depends on the circumstances I'm thrust into. So the reason why I consider the German nation particularly guilty, and why I despise the German nation in particular. I mean, for one, I would say everyone, no matter what nation he's from, should despise his nation most of all the nations, because true Aufklärung is self-criticism. And if you are able to self-reflect and self-criticize, you should know your own nation and its failings best. But with that aside, the point is that it is Germany where Aufklärung happened. It is Germany where true radical self-criticism was discovered by our great thinkers, by someone like Kant, like Fichte. And so if you're German, you really have no excuse. I mean, you're lucky enough you can read these thinkers in the original if you want. You don't have to rely on a bad translation. You don't have to learn another language. You can just go and read them. And on top of that, of course, we Germans get it drilled into our heads in school that we were once the bad guys, that we committed a terrible crime which we mustn't ever repeat. So we should know that it is possible to be the bad guy. And we should know that it is possible to be the bad guy, to do the most terrible crime, while still thinking you are the good guy. Right? Not every nation gets talked at. Like if you look to Muscovy, they don't get talked in school that they were the bad guys. They get talked that they were the good guys who stopped the Nazis, who stopped the fascists, right? And so now the propaganda is saying, well, we are doing it again. Now the fascists are in Ukraine. This is not to excuse the people there if they fall for that propaganda and if they follow Putin. Of course, they are also guilty, but still, as a German in particular, getting talked that your people committed a genocide, thinking they were in the right, you simply must be able to be self-critical, to be critical of the reigning ideology, to be critical of your elites, of your political leaders, of your journalists and media, and not blindly follow them like sheep. And if one nation has no excuse for once again supporting a genocide, it certainly is this nation. But again, it turns out some people simply don't have a conscience. And the negative comments I received were certainly different in content as well as in tone. So I don't want to group them all in necessarily. But there is something striking which they all had in common, and this is what I want to address here, because I think it can serve as an example for Aufklärung that can serve anyone, even people who have not written these negative comments. So, first of all, let me pick 3 of these comments. Let me show them to you. And then, after briefly addressing them individually, I will talk about what they all have in common and what is so striking to me. First, let's start with the nicest comment I received. The comment reads, "Only one people is not allowed a right to exist in Palestine, the Palestinian one? Are you crazy? The Jews are not allowed a right to exist since at least 1948. Damn it. And that's by these fucking aggressive Arabs. I will end my subscription of you immediately, because I'm simply pretty fed up with listening to you leftist anti-Semitic pseudo-students. Asshole." Well, good thing this guy is not aggressive like those fucking Arabs, right? I always considered it one of the laws of the internet that the more exclamation marks someone uses, the less likely he is to be right. It is clear that this guy cannot listen, which is typical for unaufkläred people. They cannot listen and they cannot read. Because at the point he's referring to at the start of this lecture on Hannah Arendt and Israel's totalitarianism, I did in fact not talk about the right to exist. Rather, I said there is no such thing as a state's right to exist, not for Israel, not for any other state. I said what there is a right of a people to self-determination. And I said that is what is denied only to one people, the Palestinian people. And I'm sorry, this is simply a fact, right? I mean, this guy exemplifies what ideology does to you. It completely blinds you to any reality and completely makes you unable to make experience, to just look and experience what is there. I mean, how ideologically blinded do you have to be to think that the one people that has a state for about 80 years now, and the state with the most modern army in the Middle East, a state that is armed with nuclear weapons, a state that has the whole Western bloc supporting it, especially the superpower, the United States, to see dead people somehow as the underdog and the victim and the ones whose existence is somehow threatened, yeah, who are facing an existential threat and have to defend themselves against. While on the other side, you have a people that for at least 80 years has been oppressed, that has been living under occupation and apartheid, and that has no state. And I explained in that very lecture how having no state, right, not being a citizen, not even a second-class citizen, is basically the prerequisite of genocide. How that is what made the terrible crimes and genocides in the colonies in Africa possible, how that is what made it possible to commit such atrocities in Eastern Europe during the Second World War, right? I explained how the Jews in Western Europe, half of them survived, while in Eastern Europe, like Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic lands, there only 1 in 20 Jews survived, because that is precisely the area where Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union crushed the states between them and basically created a lawless Wild West where anything could happen. So statelessness is pretty much the condition of the possibility of genocide, right? And these people, this oppressed people, which has nothing apart from knives and some self-built rockets, to consider them the perpetrator and not the victim, to consider them the threat and not the threatened, you have to be completely ideologically blinded. But I mean, it's clear that this guy is an anti-Semite, because as I never tire to remind people, Arabs are also Semites, of course. And this guy is clearly racist towards Arabs. I mean, that's a general issue. These guys like that, they don't even truly care about Israel or about the Jews or whatever. That's just a pretense, right? No, they disregard them too. They objectify them too. But they really care about is their racism towards Arabs. I mean, this is the same kind of people who will complain about Arab Mohammedan refugees coming here. They are just glad that Israel is killing brown people. And I find it ironic, and if the topic was less serious, it would be funny, how the ones who are clearly racist and don't hide their racism, right? Talking about those fucking aggressive Arabs, accuse others of racism. I mean, he called me an anti-Semite, who are clearly not. I mean, neither in that particular lecture nor anywhere else did I ever say anything remotely racist, no matter whether against Jews or against anyone else. You will simply not find such a thing. You will find me saying things that you are not supposed to say, that go against some political correct rules of conduct. You will find me criticize Israel, sure, and in the minds of lots of people, especially in Germany, criticizing Israel is akin to anti-Semitism. But if we take that nonsense away, I would ask such a person, can you point me at a single instance where I said something directly racist about Jews? I mean, he would never find me talking about those fucking aggressive Jews. That's just a formulation that would not come over my lips. So it is funny that the one who is not even hiding his racism is so quick to accuse others of racism. But clearly, this first guy is basically a fascist, and I am not calling him a fascist because he's racist. I'm not calling him a fascist because he seems to be a right-winger. I mean, going by the fact that he seems to dislike lefties, which, by the way, I'm not. Once again, there's no reason to call me that. I've never said that I'm on the left or anything. I mean, unless you consider being against racism and genocide a leftist position, in which case, okay, I guess then I'm a leftist. But that's also something I find interesting, that right-wingers automatically assume anyone who is not a complete asshole and not a complete imbecile must be a leftist, right? Like, if you don't support racism or if you don't deny climate change, then you are automatically a leftist, which, if you ask me, says more about those right-wingers than about leftism. But that aside, no, to me, fascism is not a word that just means being far right or whatever. So I'm not calling him a fascist because of his racism or because he has something against leftists. No, to me, fascism is a specific posture. It is about how you deal with people. What fascism ultimately wants is what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, so equalization or coordination, right? Everyone has to be the same. Now, how that sameness is defined might differ, right? For the Nazis, it was everyone has to be Aryan, blonde, and blue-eyed. For Israeli fascists, it is everyone has to be a Jew, right? But the point is, they want homogeneity. What they detest is any sort of heterogeneity and plurality, people being different. And the thing is, when someone is different, when you meet someone different, you can react in different ways. You can actually be happy about it. You can enjoy the difference. You can enjoy being confronted with a different perspective. You can also be against the difference, but still accept a different human being, even if not his difference. That is, you can try to make him the same as you are, right? So let's say in the past, when Christians would of course not accept the difference of other faiths, but they would not throw away the person as such, right? They would try to convert the person, maybe even forcibly convert, which might be despotic, but it's not yet fascistic. Right? If they didn't accept the Jew who was not of Christian faith but of Mosian faith, and forcibly converted him, like in Spain back in the day, that's not yet actual fascism. Actual fascism is when you throw the person away for being different and don't even give the person a chance to change, to please you, right? Like under the Nazis, it was not about faith, right? Jews could not convert. It's not that they said, okay, we don't like the way Jews are. Jews have to change. They have to become more German. I mean, there were Jews who tried that. There were Jews who assimilated, who put away all the Jewishness. There were even Jews who essentially tried to be Nazis, right? There was a union of national German Jews who tried to be good German nationalists. Didn't help them with the Nazis. So with fascism, when you are wrong, then you are wrong and you get thrown away. And it's just a matter of circumstances what that throwing away entails, right? Like this guy, of course, he cannot do anything except angrily scream at me via the internet and unsubscribe to me. But that same guy, with that posture of his, if the situation, if society was different, I could see him join a lynch mob. I could see him burn me at the stake or put me in a camp. The point is, I mean, presumably he has watched some of my other videos because he said he's unsubscribing to me, so he must have been subscribed to me before. So he should know that I'm a reasonable guy. He should know that rationality matters to me. I mean, this very channel is called the Voice of Reason for a reason, right? And he should know also that in particular morality matters to me, that I want to stand for justice. Now, let's assume I'm indeed wrong when it comes to Israel and Palestine. He should at least acknowledge that I mean well, that I'm not just some foaming Jew hater, but that I want to stand for justice. So if I'm wrong, why doesn't he talk to me? Why doesn't he try to show me my error? Why doesn't he try to convince me? In which case he would help me become more aufkläred, and he would help the world and Israel at large, right? Because Israel would then have one enemy less and one supporter more. I mean, clearly the reason he doesn't do that is because he's too weak. That's what it comes down to, and but I will discuss in future lectures when I talk about Kant's concept of Aufklärung. It's which the unaufkläredness Kant says is based on fear and laziness. So ultimately, it's just that it's too much work for the fascist, right? And that is the posture that fascists always have. There is something, there's a challenge. Life confronts them with people that are different, be it refugees coming here to Europe, or be it in the case of the Israelis, their Palestinian neighbors that co-inhabit the land with them. And the fascist doesn't want to work to deal with these different people, to find common ground, to find a mode of living together. The fascist just says, leave me alone with that challenge. I want to push them away. I want to throw them away. Whether that involves canceling somebody over YouTube or whether that involves ethnic cleansing and genocide is really just a matter of circumstances. What matters is that the fascist has no regard for the humanity of the other person. The fascist just cares about being left alone, not being confronted with the difference. He doesn't care about helping the other person, right? I mean, I want to aufklären people. So if I do find someone who is wrong in some way, like let's say who is racist, it's not that I just accept that, but I don't throw the person away. I still have regard for his humanity, even if the human being as he is might be despicable, might be an asshole indeed. I still consider him having humanity in himself that I try to speak to and bring out. That's the difference between being a fascist and not being a fascist. But on to my second critic, on to an email I received, which you will see is completely different in tone. Hello, Mr. Löwer. As much as I'm grateful that you helped me decisively to better understand the philosophy of Kant, I am on the other hand actually disappointed about how one-sided, maybe even provocative, your view of Israel is. You, who uphold reason, but then don't heed its rules like extensive analysis of cause and effect, as in the case of Israel concerning the picture you draw of the recent conduct of that country. I more or less only listened to the beginning of your new lecture, where you condemn the actions of Israel without mentioning the conditions that led to these actions. That, I find, doesn't do justice to reason in this point, which according to Kant probably asks about the totality of conditions to a given condition. Now here I have two remarks to make. First off, he says I disappointed him. But in fact, in German, the word is enttäuschen, which does mean disappoint, right? And you can look into any dictionary you want, and it will tell you that enttäuschen means to disappoint. But I take language seriously. I don't just use language mindlessly the way everyone uses it. Rather, I reflect about language and I ask, what do the words actually mean? And here they are quite different. I mean, in English, disappointment sounds like you were appointed, like you got some job, you got promoted, and now you don't get it after all. You don't get appointed. Or it sounds like you have an appointment and you don't go to your appointment, right? So that makes sense, right? Because what the word disappointment, or in German the word Enttäuschung, is supposed to mean is some sort of frustration of your expectations or desires, right? Well, but in German, the word Enttäuschen, Täuschung means illusion. And täuschen as a verb means to trick someone, to scam someone. So Enttäuschung, if we take it literally, means disillusionment, being freed from an illusion. Now, the average German speaker does not reflect on that. They just use the word mindlessly and they use it in the sense of disappointment. But I always found it interesting that Germans are disappointed. That is, they are frustrated, their expectations are ruined when they are freed from an illusion. I think that says a lot about the Germans. I'm not aware of any other language having this sort of word for disappointment. I'm not aware of any other language treating being freed of an illusion as something necessarily negative. But in this sense, I can answer that I hope to. I can and I did answer that I hope to, not in English, not to disappoint, but to enttäuschen, to free from some illusion with every single one of my videos and of my texts, because that's what Aufklärung is about, right? Freeing people from their illusions, from their prejudices, from their wrong assumptions, from their ideologies. That aside, if this guy followed my Kant lectures, which he said he does, right? He could have noted that one of Kant's greatest accomplishments, not the only one, but one of his important accomplishments in philosophy, is to have clearly and truly distinguished theoretical and practical philosophy. Theoretical philosophy deals with being, whether it is theoretical metaphysics dealing with supersensual being, like with God or the soul, or whether it is applied theoretical philosophy, which to Kant would be natural science, so dealing with the being that we can empirically experience, right? But in either case, theory deals with being, while the practical philosophy deals with freedom and with how we should use our freedom. So with the laws that should guide our freedom, that is the moral laws. And these are to be kept apart. So when he is talking about an analysis of cause and effect when it comes to Israel's actions, surely you could go and from the point of a theoretical science, you could analyze the not the cause of the Israelis' actions, unless you want to claim that the Israelis are not human beings, that they have no free will. But you could analyze, of course, their reasons for acting in such a manner. But the whole point of Kant is that as human beings, we are free. We have autonomy. And freedom to him means spontaneity. It means the ability to start a new chain of causality. We are not just in a chain of causality, like the things in nature, right? Like imagine a row of domino blocks, one block falling against the second, and then the second has to fall, right? He's not free to keep standing. That would be a cause. That's why I just said, unless you want to say the Israelis are not human, you cannot say the actions have a cause, because a cause implies the effect. A cause implies that there is no freedom, that the effect has to follow because there was this cause. We can be like that, Kant would say. We can, because we are also sensual beings, we can be part of this natural causation. We can act on our desires, for example. But we can at any point completely spontaneously say, no, I want to start something new. I want to start a completely new chain of causality. And in my lecture on freedom, what is freedom, and do we have a free will, I gave examples. I gave the example of this case of Giselle Pellicot that went through the media a lot, right, in the last year. This French woman who for years and years had been drugged by her husband and then raped by random men that he found online. And I said there that in court, her husband said, and we might have spoken the truth. I cannot judge that. He said that he himself was raped or abused as a child, and that traumatized him and gave him these perverted drives and so on. And again, this might be true. So if we look from the position of theoretical science, so in this case psychology, right, we could say that yes, his actions, his abuse of his wife was caused by what was done to him as a child. This would be an analysis of cause and effect. But would it excuse him? No, of course not. We would say to him, that was terrible, that should not have happened to you, but it is still no excuse for what you did, because you have free will. You are not simply determined by what happened to you. You could still have said, I don't want to do it to somebody else. And you could have, if you alone didn't have the strength, you could have gone to therapy, for example. And the same can be said of Israel. There might be all sorts of causes that we could analyze, but they simply don't matter. I mean, I will say it as it is. When somebody kills at least 20,000 children, I mean, most likely it's a much higher number than that, but at least 20,000 children, there is no possible cause that could justify that. None. I mean, this should not be a controversial statement. And I consider anyone who will disagree with my next statement scum of the earth. My next statement being, there is never any possible justification for genocide, and there is never any possible justification for killing tens of thousands of children. There simply is none. If somebody kills 20,000 children and then opens his mouth to try and give you an explanation of his cause, the cause that made him do that, the only sensible answer to that is slap him across the face. So I am, in fact, being very much true to my philosophy and to Kant's philosophy, because I am able to keep the theoretical and the practical apart. Theoretically, you can explain things however you might, but that doesn't change that if you look from the perspective of practical philosophy, that is from the perspective of morality, you can judge that this action was wrong. Period. Now there's one more comment I quickly want to read to you. Again, one I received on YouTube. One can deny the legitimacy of a state, its origin, its politics, its moral foundation, but not its existence. If tanks, bureaucracy, borders, laws, taxes, an army, and an administration are real, then the state exists, whether one likes or not. Well, what can I say here? Only that if we do want to start nitpicking, then I could also say that you also can't deny a state's origin or a state's politics. I mean, by that he probably means we can say that the state should not have originated, or that his politics as he does them are wrong. But in that case, you could also then deny a state's existence, because that could then also simply mean denying that the state should exist. But nitpicking wording aside, what I actually want to talk about, as I already said, is what these three have in common. And to be sure, once again, they are different, of course, in their wording. They are different in their tone. They are different in their approach and posture, right? Again, the first guy has a fascistic posture. The second person who wrote me an email, I replied to, and he replied back, and he was actually willing to have some sort of dialogue. So I certainly don't want to group him with the first guy in that sense. But there is one thing all these three comments have in common, and that is that they have not watched my video. They have not listened to my lecture, right? The guy who wrote me an email outright says it, right? He said that he only listened to the beginning where I criticized Israel so much, and then he stopped. And the other two don't outright say it, but we can very much assume that it's the case, right? The first guy who insulted me clearly got triggered by me talking about Israel's right to exist and about the Palestinians' right to self-determination, which is denied them. And I do that in like the first 5 minutes of the lecture. And the third guy, he's clearly going off by just what the thumbnail of the video says. It says Israel is no state, but something else. Or by what I say in like the first minute of the video, where I also say that Israel is no real state. And that was enough for him to say, no, of course Israel is a state, you cannot deny that. Listing all the things he did. Well, I would say having tanks is not what makes you a state. You can own tanks without being a state. And of the things he listed, what is important is having borders and having laws. And had he listened to my lecture, then he would not have posted that comment, because in that lecture I explain how Israel lacks both. How Israel has no clear borders, but keeps expanding and not respecting the borders of its neighbors. And that is exactly how Arendt describes first imperialism, from which totalitarianism comes, and then totalitarianism, right? It is constantly expanding. It does not enter diplomatic relations with its neighbors, accepting their and respecting their sovereignty, but rather it doesn't know borders. It only knows a frontier that can always be moved. It treats everything beyond its frontier as no man's land that can be conquered at any opportune moment. And likewise, I talked about how Israel has no real laws. Again, in imperialism and then in totalitarianism, Arendt says there is no rule by law, not even by unjust law. There is a bureaucratic rule by decree. There is, you could say, just an executive branch of government, but no legislative branch or judiciary. And that is, of course, how the West Bank is ruled. But increasingly, it's also how Israel itself is ruled. I talked about how with the judicial reform that was being pushed before October the 7th, there is this West Bankization of Israel proper. There's lawlessness more and more being introduced to Israel. Now, had he listened to my lecture, he would have known that. So we can assume that all three only listen to the first few minutes of this over 3-hour lecture. And I will say it as it is, it's embarrassing. Their responses cannot be taken seriously because they are not truly responses to my lecture. They are just expressions of their own prejudices. Right? This is what a prejudice means. This is also how Kant describes a prejudice. You already have made your judgment, a prejudgment, and therefore you don't look. And it's absolutely embarrassing to judge something, to make a clearly wrong judgment about something, when you haven't looked at it. I mean, the third guy who just criticizes that I'm saying Israel is no state, but who doesn't criticize me for criticizing Israel. I mean, according to his profile picture, which has a communist, a Soviet flag, and according to his profile, where he has liked many videos on socialism, he's probably a guy who doesn't mind criticism of Israel as such. But he's also probably a guy who just came across this video and quickly clicked on it and hasn't watched my channel before. But the other two clearly have watched my channel, clearly have watched Kant videos of mine. And so they could know, because I talked about that extensively, that Kant says thoughts as such are empty. I can think of anything, and as long as it doesn't self-contradict, as long as it's not illogical, I can believe in it. It seems possible to me. But such empty thoughts are worthless. Kant says thoughts need to be filled with viewing. I need to actually look what is there, right? I can think that people might be living on the moon, but when we actually look, we find that the moon is empty and there is no life there. And the problem when you have a prejudice is, of course, that you refuse to look, right? And then it becomes impossible to change your mind. I mean, had these people, these first two people who didn't like me criticizing Israel in that way, had they stuck around, they could have seen in that video someone, a physician, who was there, a Western physician who was in Gaza, giving humanitarian medical aid, talking about how he saw children being deliberately shot. But since they stopped watching the video right away because I criticized Israel, they missed that. They didn't get to the point where they saw that my criticism is very much justified. And that's, of course, just one example. I mean, the internet is full of Israeli war crimes. You could easily see them if you ever looked for them. But of course, if you are already set in your ideology that Israel is the good guy and that anyone calling it genocide must be an anti-Semite, then of course you will never look. You will never go out there and try to actually find the truth and actually encounter the war crimes. So you will end up living in a parallel reality where these war crimes are not a thing. And again, this is why such people, you basically cannot change their minds. I mean, it is as if I said, I have a room with red walls. And if someone doesn't believe me, I could say, I invite you to my home. I will show you the room. And then I could show him and he could see that the room is indeed red. But if someone, when I tell him I have a room with red walls, and I could show you, would not even let me finish, would not even let me get to the part where I say, I can show you, you can come to my home, but would just say, oh, that's outrageous, I don't believe that you have a room with red walls, I will never listen to you again, and then turns away. How could I ever prove myself to that person? Because the person refuses to listen to the point where the proof is offered, right? And see, this is what interests me as an Aufklärer always. I keep saying to people, it is not so much the superstructure, the opinions, the specific beliefs that people have that matter. It is their posture. How do they go through life? And here we see that these three people, as different as their opinions might be, right? The first guy clearly is a racist, hating Arabs, blindly on the side of Israel. The last guy, presumably a socialist, presumably critical of Israel. So their opinions might be different, but they are the same in that they have this posture of going through life with their prejudices, and as soon as they encounter something that sounds wrong to them, they immediately turn away. They don't bother looking, okay, what is actually meant, what evidence is actually presented. They just say, oh, this sounds wrong or this sounds crazy or whatever, so I won't bother. This is a very unaufkläred posture. And again, I want to stress that at least the first two examples are people that the first says he was subscribed to my channel, the second thanked me for my Kant lectures, so there are people that presumably have watched, maybe not all, but some of my Kant videos. So I do wonder, how is this conduct of theirs possible? What have they learned from my Kant videos? Because I gave 3 lectures, for example, on Kant's methods of thinking. And all 3 methods they could have applied here. The first method, if you want this in more detail, go watch those lectures. But the first method is the skeptical method. Is Kant saying you should not have prejudices. You should be like a judge who will not immediately judge someone in court, but rather will first listen to the evidence. So even if something does sound weird to you or does sound wrong to you, first listen and first consider the arguments for both sides and try, Kant says even, try to make the other argument as strong as possible. Try to ask yourself, okay, what speaks for this side's point? Clearly they did not follow the skeptical method. And then there's the critical method, where Kant says you should ask yourself, where does an opinion come from? Even if you think someone's opinion is wrong, and even if you have arguments that you think prove that it is wrong, you must still accept the fact that to that other person at least, his opinion seems right. Or else it would not be his opinion, right? So you must ask yourself, how is it possible that he has this, according to your own opinion, wrong opinion, and doesn't see that it is wrong? What makes it seem right to him? So in other words, it's not enough to refute a point. You also have to explain how that point, despite maybe being wrong, seems true to the ones who state that point. So if they had applied the critical method, they could have thought, okay, we believe that he is wrong about Israel. Maybe even, as the first guy said, that he's anti-Semitic. But why? Why would I be wrong? Why would I be anti-Semitic? So, again, assuming they have watched my Kant videos, what could they know about me? They could know that I myself am partially Jewish. I mean, not that that saves you from accusations these days. You just, instead of getting called anti-Semite, you get called a self-hating Jew. But so, why would I be anti-Semitic based on that? Then second, they know that I stand for Aufklärung. They know that I stand against racism. They know, I've just spent weeks and months talking about moral philosophy and talking about human dignity, talking about the humanity of every single human being, stressing that even if someone, the way he is now, happens to be scum, even the worst criminal still has humanity that must be regarded. I stress that for that very reason. We must not throw him away. For that very reason, there cannot be a death penalty, but rather we must try to aufklär people. We must try, as unlikely as it seems, maybe in some cases, that they may ever become better, that they may ever repent. If we believe that they have free will, then we must believe that it is possible. We must believe that the worst possible person could, if we wanted to, turn into the best possible person. So we have to regard him not for what he is, maybe, but for this potential he has. So if they know that this is my stance, this is what I believe, why would I possibly be racist? Why would I possibly, no matter how much I might criticize the Israelis, why would I possibly want to drive them into the sea or whatever you get accused of if you dare to criticize Israel, right? This makes no sense. And also, they know that I stand for rationality. So why would I suddenly hold an irrational position? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that I can't ever be wrong. But what I am saying is that it must be explained why I, of all people, should happen to be wrong here. And they don't bother to ask themselves that question, right? They don't say to themselves either, okay, we know that this guy is so and conscientious, that this guy wants to only talk about things he knows what he's talking about. This guy, before starting his Kant lectures, he actually read all the history of Kant, all 29 volumes of Kant's collected works, not just his works, also his letters, his notes, his lectures. So, okay, now he's talking about Israel. Can't he assume that here too he was so and conscientious? That here too he is talking from an informed position? Wouldn't that be more likely? And then, last but not least, there's what I call the sympathetic method, or you could also maybe say the part-taking method, which is about Kant saying, even if someone is wrong, there is no such thing as total error. Because if it was totally wrong, everyone would see that it was wrong. So even the wrong opinion must contain some partial truth. So instead of throwing it all out of the window, Vasa tried to be sympathetic to someone, both as a person. In other words, don't be a fascist, right? This is basically the opposite of fascism. This is accepting the other person, even if they are wrong, and trying to speak to that part of them that is right. Kant saying, no physician can bring back to life a corpse. So if you want to heal someone, you must assume that there's still some life in them. Likewise, if you want to aufklär someone, you must assume that they are not a complete idiot or that they are not completely evil, right? And so they should have at least looked for the partial truth in my words instead of just saying it's wrong. So clearly, they didn't apply any of these three methods of Kant's, nor anything else I talked about. I mean, in my Kant lectures, I already said, I talked at length about how to Kant mere thinking is empty, you need to view. So they should know that they cannot just judge my lecture without having listened to it, this 3-hour lecture. And they should know, more importantly, that they cannot just judge Israel without ever having bothered to look at Israel's actual conduct. And then, of course, I spent so much time talking about Kant's moral philosophy, about reverence for humanity, about human dignity. And this goes especially for this first commenter I read. I really have to wonder. I mean, he says he was subscribed to me. What did he subscribe to and why? I mean, did he not listen to all my previous lectures? What made him subscribe? I was spending weeks and months talking about human dignity, and did he listen to that and not and say, oh yes, very interesting, oh yes, very good, very right, lots of true things he says? And then as soon as I dare saying something he doesn't like, he calls me an asshole? Is that what he took away from my lectures about human dignity? That you should go and insult people? Or for that matter, that you should go and be triggered? Like if he watched my lecture on the duties towards oneself, he could also know that he is throwing away his own dignity by not acting in a rational manner, not seeking a rational dialogue, not just disagreeing with me rationally. Your tone can be sharp. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes it's justified to really tell someone that they are wrong and that they support evil. That's not the point. But being triggered, just getting aggressive, just being overwhelmed by your anger, that means throwing your own humanity away. Because you throw your own rationality away, and you could have learned that from my lectures. So I really wonder, have these people listened to my lectures? Of course, that's not something new to me or something surprising. I've always found that people tend to come to me and at first they like what they find because they're like, oh, this guy, he's educated, he knows a lot about philosophy, he has interesting things to say and he explains it well, so I'm gonna listen to him. But then sooner or later there always comes this point where people realize, oh shit, he's actually serious about all of that. Like, this guy actually means the things he says. And that's a point where some people value that and some people will stay precisely for that reason. But there have always throughout my life been people who got very angry once they realized that I don't just talk about morality and duty and human dignity and virtue, or I don't just talk about rational thinking or about these thinking methods of Kant's, but I actually mean it and I actually am serious about living life that way, right? And to be sure, it's something people are not used to because almost nobody else does that. I mean, I know the state of our universities. I did study. I met professors. I know how they are, and there are some that might be proper scholars that know a lot. So it might be interesting listening to them. But then, as soon as the lecture is over, they are completely regular people, like anyone else. There's nothing, even if they call themselves philosophers, there's nothing wise about them. They aren't sages, they aren't moral, and they're not even trying to be. I mean, I made lots such experiences. Like I had this one professor. I went to him often because he was among the more knowledgeable professors, and you could learn quite a few interesting things there. But then at the end of one semester, he would invite the class to his house, to his garden, and we met his wife there, and she was this terrible, bitter old woman who constantly got agitated over nothing, constantly screamed around. She was racist, constantly ranting about immigrants, and this professor was clearly embarrassed about her, like sitting away from her, having conversations with others, trying to ignore her rantings, becoming smaller and smaller. And I thought, this is what all this philosophy and all this knowledge about various philosophers you have, this is what it got you? Like, completely normal, fucked up marital life, being married to such a woman. This cannot be it. Or I have a friend who also studied at the same university here in Berlin, and when he was a freshman, he was supposed to go to a class, introduction to philosophy, and there were I think 6 classes that you could choose from, but they all had places for only 40 people max, and they ended up all being full. And he went to this one class, and it was also the only one that really he could have taken, because other classes with the times, they were at the same time as classes in his second subject that were also mandatory. So he could only really have picked that one class, and he tried talking to the teacher of that class. And I mean, the teacher could easily have said, okay, so be it, then be the 41st person in my class. Like, who cares if it's 40 or 41? I mean, clearly this is the university's fault, right? Like, how can such a situation even happen? I mean, if this is a mandatory class for the freshmen, then there should be as many places as there are freshmen, right? So either they should have taken in less students in that year, or they should have made the classes so that, I don't know, instead of 40, 45 people can take them. But this professor absolutely refused to even properly engage with my friend. Basically said, that's your problem, not mine. Yeah. Said it's not my fault that the class is full, and well, yeah, it wasn't my friend's fault either. And in the end, he even ended up saying, oh, why don't you just take the class in a later year? Which, I mean, first of all, that would just push the problem onto somebody else, right? Because the class is meant for the freshmen, and if someone in a later year ends up taking one of the limited spots, then in a later year some new freshman will again be pushed out and will have to take it at a later time again, and will again push some new freshmen out, right? And secondly, of course, this makes no sense. It's the class Introduction to Philosophy. It should be taken in the first semester, not in like the fifth or something. And my point is, this teacher of the class, he's someone who is specialized in practical philosophy and theories of justice, and he has his own website where he talks about some politically correct woke bullshit. Yeah, is very serious about these rules of conduct. You mustn't say the nasty words, right? You must say the N word and not speak it fully. But when it comes to actual lived justice, like in an actual situation, there's nothing. No regard for this poor, barely 18-year-old student, fresh out of school, completely disoriented at university, overwhelmed by it all. That's what people are used to from the professors. That's what people expect. And then when someone like me comes along, who actually takes this philosophy seriously, who actually means it when he talks about becoming more aufkläred, some people are not prepared for that. I mean, those same professors I mentioned, they may talk about theories of justice and of human rights and blah blah blah, but of course they don't address the genocide. But seriously, I would ask anyone complaining about my previous lecture, like complaining about me criticizing Israel, what did you expect? For me to constantly talk about human rights and human dignity and our duty to be moral, and then just stand by and watch a genocide unfold and not criticize it in the least bit? I mean, what did you come here for, if not for learning morality? And this is an issue I've always faced, that people may listen and nod and say, yeah, very interesting, very right, and then they go back into their regular life, and it is as if they had never listened to that. And this is something that sometimes it never ends. I mean, I've experienced it in people that I've known for over a decade, and that I've tried to aufklären for over a decade. That still, in some situation, they acted as if they had never heard the most basic things about Aufklärung from me. They acted as if they had never met me. They acted like a completely random person who had never dealt with all this Aufklärung and all this philosophy. And since Aufklärung is mainly about self-criticism, of course, in such cases, I will always ask myself, okay, what can I do better as a teacher? How can I make sure this really reaches people? But then also, there is, of course, a point where I can't do it better, right? I can improve 1,000 things maybe, but there does come a point where it stops being about me and it is about the other person, because you can, of course, not force anyone to Aufklärung. You can maybe be the best teacher in the world, not saying that I am, but you could be, and still ultimately the other person has free will. The other person can of course decide how to deal with what he has talked. So I can only really implore you to take seriously what you hear and to really try to live it. But at the end of the day, that's of course your decision. And in light of such negative comments, I also want to stress one more thing that I think is important beyond this topic. There are these prohibitions of words, especially here with this topic. You mustn't say genocide. You mustn't say apartheid. You mustn't say settler colonialism. And surely you also mustn't say, as I said, totalitarianism. Maybe this is slightly less bad in other countries than here in Germany. Here in Germany, it's extra bad. Like you cannot imagine how bad it is. If you are imagining it as very bad, then you're still not imagining it as bad as it is. So you are not allowed to use certain words. You get cancelled for using certain words. You get called an anti-Semite. But I want to stress that these are not just prohibitions of words. These are prohibitions of understanding. Because words are not just words. Words have a meaning. Words are signs for concepts. Here you can listen to my Kant lecture on what is the intellect, because the intellect or the understanding to Kant is the faculty of concepts. Now, a concept is what you think when hearing a certain word. The word is just a sign, so to say, that points at the concept. The word as such is not important. You can have different words for the same thing, right? Like you have in different languages. But even within one language, maybe you have some sort of synonyms. But what is important is the thing that you are thinking, that you mean by that word. And Kant says a concept is the sort of a rule, or maybe a bunch of rules. Like when you think something, a concept, you think a general rule that applies to everything that falls under that concept, and this helps you understanding these things. Like when you think the concept of mammal, for example, you think a rule, you think an animal that gives milk to its young. So this rule now applies to everything the concept of mammal applies to, whether it's a human, a horse, a dog, a mouse, doesn't matter. And again, this helps you understanding the world and dealing with the world. Like when you have a newborn mammal and you know it's a mammal, you now know that it needs milk. You know that you cannot just let it be, just put it somewhere and it will then just feed itself, right? With some other animals, that's possible, like insects, like a maggot. It just hatches and then it starts eating. But with the mammal, you know, it needs milk. So by forbidding us from using certain words, certain terms, what is really happening is we are forbidden to think, and we are forbidden to make sense of things, to understand them. Like, let's just take the word settler colonialism. I'm aware that to the Israel apologists, all of these terms, genocide, apartheid, totalitarianism, and as well settler colonialism, they sound like just bad words. Like we are just calling Israel names, like we are just looking for all the worst things there are, and we are applying it all to Israel to make Israel look bad. And I won't even deny that that's the case for some people protesting Israel. I don't think that they all know what they are talking about. Many of them have just heard those terms thrown around, and since they sound bad, since they sound evil, and since these people think that Israel is evil, they're happy to take them up and to apply them to Israel. But at least for us more sensible and more aufkläred people, for someone like Thunberg or like Albanese, or for me, you can be certain that we don't just go around using bad names to insult Israel. You can be certain that we, the words we use, they have a certain meaning and we understand something by them. So when you take the word as an example of settler colonialism, of course, it is obviously settler colonialism. Like this this is not even something that needs to be discussed. It's just ridiculous that people will deny even that. Not just because the early Zionists actually talked about colonialism, because in their time it was not yet a bad word that you wanted to avoid, but also because, well, you just have to look at it, right? I mean, what else is it when the Palestinians lived there in their land for centuries, and then suddenly strange people from Europe come with strange customs, with strange food, even with strange trees, right? In places they cut down the Mediterranean trees and planted European trees to feel more at home, right? And steal and settle your land. And of course, that is settler colonialism. Now, when you use that term, it helps you to understand certain things. For example, you can now understand the 7th of October. You can understand what happened here. Because settler colonialism, like any concept, implies certain rules. And one rule is that the indigenous people being settled, they don't like that. And they fight back, right? That's what the Native Americans did, for example. That's what people in various colonies in Africa did. And also, as a rule, this anti-colonial fight is bloody. And atrocities, war crimes are committed. That's unfortunately how it is. And I don't want to justify it, but we have to say it as it is. It's only happening because there are these settlers in the first place. And then, so, right, if we put the 7th of October in this context of other anti-colonial uprisings and fights, then we understand it better. And also we understand the reaction better, because, of course, if the natives fight back and maybe commit a massacre in the process, the settlers react with even more violence and react with ethnic cleansing or react with genocide. I mean, especially here in Germany, we should know that, because that is what we did in our first ever genocide, the first genocide of the last century. Yes, Germany did not just commit the Holocaust, we also did a genocide before that, but almost no one knows anything about it. It's never really talked about. It's barely talked in schools. The government that learned so much from the Holocaust almost refuses to even acknowledge this other genocide. But the German Empire in 94 had a colony in what's nowadays Namibia, and they settled there. And there was an uprising by the native Herero people, and they killed over 100 German settlers, German farmers. And there were also stories going around amongst the Germans of terrible violence, terrible atrocities having been committed, like we heard about the 7th of October. And then the reaction was genocide. 80,000 or some people of the Herero people and also of the Nama people who joined in were slaughtered or were driven into the desert and prevented from getting out or getting to water springs, so that they would die of thirst there. So if we have these rules, if we have this concept of settler colonialism and we know how it works, then we know perfectly well that it can lead to something like the 7th of October, and that in turn can lead to something like genocide. And this is what in that previous lecture I wanted to do with the concept of totalitarianism. I didn't just want to say, oh, Israel is evil, Israel is like Hitler or Stalin. rather I wanted to talk about a concept, about a certain rule, and I explained that rule and how it applied to Israel in order to understand it better. And again, by forbidding us from using such words, they are forbidding us from understanding what's going on at all, right? Because let's be frank here, the other side has no other concepts to offer, no alternative understanding. I mean, that would be one thing. Then we could discuss which understanding is better. But the other side does not understand at all and does not even want to understand, right? The first comment I read shows that very well. Like, this guy just says, okay, the poor Jews, they are not accepted, they are not given their right to exist since 1948. But why? I mean, we must explain what's happening there. And all he's saying is because of those fucking aggressive Arabs. So apparently in his mind, everything could be fine and dandy. The Arabs could just accept the Jews, but they just happen to be like that, right? They are just these savage barbarian people that are always so aggressive, always screaming, always attacking you, and so they just can't keep quiet. That's not understanding. That's refusing to understand, right? And it's the same when these people accuse anyone of anti-Semitism. When they accuse the Arabs in general, or the Palestinians, or Hamas of anti-Semitism. I mean, when they say the 7th of October was an anti-Semitic attack, that indeed is just a word that they use to insult, that they use to make others look back, because there's no understanding offered here. I mean, what does anti-Semitism mean? Why are people anti-Semitic? Those apologists of Israel don't bother answering those questions. They will just label, oh, they are anti-Semites. So in their mind, the Palestinians in Gaza, they're just sitting around and they could have a great life if they just wanted. Gaza could be the Shanghai of the Middle East. I mean, we have all heard this bullshit. While it was Israel's military policy to mow the lawn, as they called it, from time to time, so bombing Gaza from time to time. Sure, they could have turned into the Shanghai of the Middle East. So they are just sitting around. They could have peace if they just wanted. Israel is doing nothing to them. The Israelis always want peace. But for some random reason, no one even knows why. No one even knows where it comes from. They just hate Jews. And so they attack. That's all the explanation offered when they say they are anti-Semites. And if the matter wasn't so serious, you could laugh about it. Because it's just so shallow. It's childish. And the same when they call critics of Israel here in the West anti-Semites, like when this one commenter called me an anti-Semite, or when someone like Greta Thunberg is called an anti-Semite, or all the students protesting. Again, a word should mean something. It should mean a concept. It should mean certain rules. So you should be able to explain the world with it. You should be able to better understand what is happening in the world. So I ask you, if you say all these people are anti-Semites, why? Where do you think that comes from? Of course, they don't bother to answer that because it's part of Zionist ideology that anti-Semitism is just this eternal bane of humanity. I mean, they need to believe that everyone is an anti-Semite because otherwise there would be no justification for Israel existing, right? But obviously children are not born anti-Semites, so you would have to explain where it comes from. And I mean, take any random protesting student, or take someone like Greta Thunberg. If you grow up nowadays in the West, and you go to school in the West, and you are somewhat educated, as university students probably are, you learned about the Holocaust, you learned about the persecution of Jews, you were taught how bad that was, how evil that was. I'm not saying that makes it impossible for people to still become anti-Semites. I mean, of course, there are people who still become anti-Semites, but still, you have to explain it, how you think that happened. Like, do you think Greta Thunberg just woke up one day and said, "Oh, I'm going to hate Jews now"? And also, you would have to explain it in the context of everything else, right? Like I already said, like, why would I be anti-Semitic when A, I'm part Jewish, and B, and more importantly, I stand for Aufklärung. I stand for having regard for human dignity. Or why would Greta Thunberg, who is always on the side of the oppressed, who always, from the very start of her activism, stood for justice, who always stressed that we need to not just fight climate change, but we need to fight for climate justice. We need to fight also for the rights of the poorer countries or of indigenous people. Greta Thunberg, who stood with Black Lives Matter, who stood with the Sami people of northern Scandinavia, who stood with the Kurdish people in Turkey, who stood with the people of Western Sahara. Why all of a sudden would she, of all people, be racist? So the other side has nothing to offer but, yeah, Arabs are just savage, aggressive barbarians, and yeah, everyone, the Arabs and leftists and so on, they are all just anti-Semites. These words are indeed just insults, and that's why you don't even need to engage with them, because there is nothing to engage with. No, I say, as a philosopher, your words should mean something. You should think something when using a word. You should reflect, what do I mean by this word? And there should be a concept behind it that should entail rules by which you understand the word. And that is what I tried to offer in that previous lecture. I tried to, through the concept of totalitarianism, help you better understand what Israel is and what Israel is doing. Well, with all of that said, before I close this off, I want to say there was one serious criticism that reached me. I mean, as I said, there was also lots of praise, lots of positive comments. There was one person that wrote me an email that contained some critical remarks that were actually serious, and those I also want to address. Those I also think could be interesting for everyone. And that is, I talked in that previous lecture on Israel and on Arendt's concept of totalitarianism. I talked about how to Arendt, the right to be part of a state, the right to citizenship, is the one and only human right, because it is the right to have rights at all. It is the right to belong to a legal community at all. Even as a second-class citizen, you can protest to have full rights. But if you are completely superfluous, if you don't belong at all, like refugees nowadays, or like the Jews of Eastern Europe when the states there were destroyed, or nowadays like the Palestinians, or like back in the days the native people in colonies in Africa or in America, then anything can happen to you. Well, this person who criticized me said that this is correct, but it is only one half of the explanation when it comes to genocide. And he used an analogy. He said when there is big wood fires, forest fires, we can of course explain that by the forest being very dry, because of the climate change and so on. But then, even when the forest is dry, that doesn't automatically produce a fire. There still must be something causing the fire, like someone committing arson, right? The dryness is then the reason why the fire can spread so much. But the dryness as such does not produce the fire. So in Kantian terms, you could say that the dry forest is the condition of the possibility of a big forest fire, but you still need the spark that starts the fire. And likewise with genocide, you could say that statelessness of people not belonging to any sort of legal framework, is the condition of the possibility of genocide. These people are now at the danger of being genocided. But this is just like the dry forest, and there still needs to be an arsonist starting the fire. And to that, my reply would be that, yes, of course, that is quite true. Surely you could also talk about the arsonists, and you could also talk about why do people commit arson, what makes them do that. But that would simply be another lecture, right? That would be another topic. And it would be a topic not so much for the philosophy of right. It would be a topic maybe for psychology, for example. And it's a topic that maybe at some other point I want to address. I mean, when you look at psychology, there's people who have dealt with such questions, like Wilhelm Reich, who's very important to me, today lesser known student of Freud, who in 1933 wrote The Mass Psychology of Fascism, and then later he wrote a book, The Murder of Christ. He had this concept of the emotional plague of people who themselves were hurt, like the life, the vitality in them was hurt. They cannot bear life, vitality in somebody else. So if they see someone like Christ, like Jesus, they have to destroy this vitality. And this, Reich said, is what caused the murder of Christ or of others like Giordano Bruno. And this is also what caused the genocide of the Jews. And I want at some point to give lectures on Reich. So yeah, sure, you could talk about all of that. It would simply be another topic. Because the philosophy of right, of course, does not deal with why people do certain things, with the psychology of people. It just deals with, well, justice and how to enact justice. I would say, however, that whatever may be the reason why people commit arson, one single arsonist is already enough to set fire to a whole forest if the forest is dry. Of course, we should try to get people to a point where they don't want to commit arson. Of course, we should try to aufklär people, to make people more moral so that they wouldn't commit arson. But even if everyone else, if millions of people would not commit arson, again, one single person is enough to set a whole forest ablaze if the forest is dry. So if we want to prevent forest fires, maybe we should try to prevent the dryness. Maybe we should do something about the climate crisis. And likewise, when it comes to genocide, sure, we should try to make people more moral. We should try to get rid of racism in the world. But a few bad people, if there is statelessness, if there is lawlessness, a few bad people are already enough in that condition to commit terrible crimes. So we should rather make sure, first of all, that the forest isn't dry. I will very soon go back to my Kant lectures and get into Kant's philosophy of right. And Kant says at some point that a functioning state should be a state that could even be a state of devils. What Kant means by that is, if the state only works if all its citizens are angels, it's not a working state. Angels don't need a state. If everyone was moral, we wouldn't need a law forbidding us from murdering or stealing. These laws are not meant for the moral people, because the moral people would not do this anyways. These laws are meant for the immoral people, for the devils, so to speak. So there are people that would like to murder, maybe, and so we need a law that says you're not allowed to murder, and if you do, then you get punished, and you get locked away, for example, so that hopefully these people, not because it makes them more moral, like in their heart they may still be rotten, they may still have the will to murder, but because they are threatened with negative consequences for themselves, they will abstain from it. And so Kant says a good state with functioning laws and functioning institutions would be a state that, even if all the citizens were devils, would still force them to act properly. And so likewise, we should say, in preventing something like genocide, we should not rely on nations being angels. We cannot wait for the Israelis or for the Muscovites to turn into angels, but rather we need a system of, in this case, not just state law, but international law, where everyone is protected, where even if all nations happen to be devils, the law and the global institutions would still prevent them from going at each other's throats. So this is what I wanted to address, because I mean, sometimes when someone writes me an email, I might just reply in private. I'm happy to enter a dialogue, but sometimes it is something that I think concerns everyone. It is something that I think people could profit from when it is discussed in public. It is something that I think can serve as an example to help people in their Aufklärung. And so that is why I wanted to address this here. I want to give one further lecture on Arendt's concept of totalitarianism and how it applies to Israel. And apart from that, I also want to continue my lecture series on Kant, because there's still a lot more to say about Kant's philosophy. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my Aufkläring cause.